This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. So this week we've got like two halves of the episode. It's not going to be a two-parter, but there's two major things we're going to cover here. And one is SCG Con, feedback from vendors, what that event looks like, everything else. And the other is something that is seemingly less relevant to the future of Magic, but still definitely worth mentioning, and that was the most recent Hasbro earnings call, specifically as it pertains to Wizards of the Coast.
Yep.
So, without further ado, let's get started on SCG Con.
Cool. So SCG Con Winter happened again, featuring the Invitational, and I believe that's basically all that happened at this SCG Con. They planned some Flesh and Blood, which did fire. There was a Commander package. I didn't see much news about that went on, but other than that, it was kind of business as usual. This one is a little more interesting, though, because there was no coverage. There were no live standings tweeted out or linked on the site. So they really kind of kept it mum as to what was going on and what on-prem looked and kind of felt like overall. At the end of the day, we found out there were like 400 and some odd attendees to the event, which basically kind of makes up the player base for the event, which is kind of expected. To qualify, you had to grind in through their arena events. And then they came and asked you to play Standard and Modern, a format that doesn't exist on Arena and paper, so cool. And, offered up the rest of the circus that is an SCG Con. Overall, I think from what I heard, people were fine with it. Flesh and Blood stuff fired. That seemed pretty easy. I think this is, you sent me a photo. I think this is the first event where on the prize wall they had an oversized Flesh and Blood card available.
Yeah, which was pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah. So LSS is doing something similar to what WotC's doing with the oversized cards now for prize wall stuff. And the event itself, like I mentioned up top, just kind of ran as expected. There were a number of vendors there, and they seemed to be happy to be there. The strategies did seem to be a little more unique compared to some other events, and that's kind of why we really wanted to bring this up. So we know kind of what was going on. We talked about 95 a little bit behind the scenes and their strategy. You mentioned that they were actually more interested in Pokemon. Right?
Yeah, they were actually turning down a lot of power, which, typically, historically, 95 was one of the best places to take your power. They always had really good numbers. They were basically just no-sirring all power, all high-end that wasn't dual lands or casual staples, which is a market shift for them.
Yes.
Because typically they want to hoover all that stuff up. But, like your Nether Voids and Living Plains and your high-end reserve list, it's really just for EDH. They were no-sirring the whole weekend, evidently. So...
Which worked out well for some vendors like Tales of Adventure. Tales they hoovered that stuff up. Yep.
Yeah.
And we talked about how 95 is no longer in lockstep with Saito and the vendors in Japan anymore. But they did and do still arbitrage, and I wonder if the global mail system and the slowdown to receive things from Japan, we just haven't been able to in about 2 years, is kind of leading to this instance for 95.
And that could very well be the case, because when dual lands first started shifting, we talked about how the reason that Volks hit $1,000 was because that was buy list in China, and then all of a sudden those numbers have started to dwindle, and we've seen a little bit of a retrace. And it very well absolutely could be, you just can't get stuff over there anymore. So I for one would not be surprised at all if that were the case.
Yeah, and the photos that we saw coming out of the event made it look pretty decent from a vendor perspective. Buy, sell, trade all seemed pretty decent. The one thing that I kind of thought about was, and this happened late in the weekend, it just didn't strike me, and this is what I mentioned. They asked players to grind into this event via Standard on Arena, and then they host an event in paper where half of the event is a format that you can only play digitally on another application in its entirety. So that crushes the player base that's going to come in. People might just not show up because they can't play or don't have experience with half the format, which means that this event might not be the bellwether event that people were expecting it to be in terms of volume of sales, trades, buys, etc. at an event that Vegas truly will be. So, good.
Oh, I was going to say, and I think that's, this event, the feedback I got from people was basically, this event went well enough that people are incredibly excited about Vegas because you're still able to pay, very little compared to what you used to have to, because we still don't have big events. This was the first big event that wasn't TCG Con in 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
So, vendors showed up, and obviously, you're competing with other vendors on buy prices, but, whereas you used to see some vendors paying 80, 90% on some stuff, they weren't paying more than 60 to 70% on those cards that were hot listed now, just because they don't have to.
Yep.
And the expectation from vendors that I spoke with is basically like, Vegas, we're bringing a Vegas-sized bankroll, but we're expecting to get so much more bang for our buck out of it because we know we can pay less now.
Yeah.
We don't have to pay all of the money that we were paying before. And I think that's, one of the more important and prevalent parts about what's going on financially right now is, these big events, which were always good, are significantly better now because we haven't had them for so long that you're kind of in this test spot for vendors where you're like, all right, well, the standard was that we were paying X amount before.
Yep.
Can we get away with paying less now? And so far, and I don't expect this to be the case long term, it seems like, yes, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, people are looking to shift collections or get out of collections. It's recoup, essentially. And, they're happy to take what they can, as the pace of return to paper has not really picked up that much steam. And I think SCG Con, for everything it was a decent event, but I don't think it was like I said, the tent pole or the flagpole that we kind of needed it to be to show that off-brand's the wrong word now because there's no pro circuit, but the independent circuit is back to where it needs to be, that it's a lifeline for players and collectors alike. And if we do see them return in time in 2022, then I would expect things to pick up a little more, things to get more competitive between Star City and Channel to bring players back out and give the events the kind of credit they deserve.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the interesting things, and this is something you and I had talked about, is the fact that we're getting the start first on these independent circuits.
Yeah.
Is kind of by design for WotC, it seems like, where they're just like, we're going to take a step back and let you guys figure it out. You do the market research for us, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
If, who knows? We may actually never see a return to Pro Magic from WotC. Who knows?
That's true. No. At the end of the day, though, I think everything went really well as far as SCG Con is concerned. I'm still more excited for Vegas than I was SCG Con overall, but it does
for sure
alleviate a lot of questions and fear that I had about large attendance paper events, not just from an attendee standpoint to play, but also from a vendor perspective. I wasn't sure if vendors were going to actually show out to the Star City event because of the limited player pool and location, when in under 3 weeks they're going to be in Vegas. But at the same time, you also need a stock for Vegas.
Yeah.
So this does present an opportunity for that if you weren't on the TCG Con circuit, or just because there's a gap right now between Toledo and Vegas and you needed to fill some holes in inventory. I really didn't expect to see the names at Roanoke that I saw, especially from the independent contractors, quote unquote.
Yeah.
To sit behind booths and stuff like that. So from a vendor perspective, I'm very happy about what happened, and I'm excited to see what Vegas brings. And at least with Vegas, we'll be getting text coverage.
Yeah.
So there's that. It's 1999 again. Live round coverage. Hopefully they get BDM. that was top tier text coverage.
God, his was so good.
Oh, it really was. It was so good. It was action-packed Magic coverage. Earnings call, though, that's the other big topic that we had. Hasbro had their earnings call earlier in the week, and that information's I'm surely been disseminated. We liked and retweeted a nice breakdown that Ben Bleiwiss did of the earnings call that really just kind of put into perspective why things are actually looking on the up and up for WotC under Hasbro, and why you can take solace in this.
Yeah.
So, for a quick breakdown, we're just pulling up one of the charts contained within for the major segments that basically just shows year-over-year comparisons of Q3 for WotC, and it's at where it needs to be. Net revenues are up, operating profit loss up, which is fine, but it's not up that much, and then operating profit loss, again, up, but while adjusted, it's not screamingly high like you would expect from a brand that's kind of floating or treading water. But this all came straight from the success of D&D, the licensed digital game Adventures, and Forgotten Realms is D&D, and Midnight Hunt. They said were extremely popular and did extremely well. There was very strong demand for these products in the Q3 comparison.
One of my favorite things about this call, and as an aside, Magic Legends was not mentioned anywhere.
Oh my God, yeah.
It is telling, though, that they were able to pay to develop a completely new title, and still profit digitally after shutting the title down and refunding everyone for their purchases in the lifetime of the game.
That was actually explained. If people want to go back and listen to the introductory stories that happened in the Receivables, the Cedric Phillip, Patrick Sullivan podcast, the Shadows over Innistrad episode. Patrick Sullivan was working for Activision at the time in 2016 when Skylanders came about, and they're like a cross between Pokemon and Amiibo figures for the Nintendo Wii consoles. And Patrick said the IP was bought, they developed a digital game, and the product was launched and then ended 2 weeks after launch. And the reason they did that was because after they brought on the game studio that made Candy Crush, basically the operating mantra that came down was, unless you have another Hearthstone on your hands, the project lifespan is 2 weeks. And they were already profitable for a year in those 2 weeks. With all the marketing contracts and everything else that had been done, that product was already profitable, so they just cut it. So that's very likely the same case with Magic Legends. For everything else that happened around it, for everybody that paid into it, a product that was profitable, and then they could just lop it off.
But I think the thing that Ben touches on, and this is very important, is that it seems like the development strategy for Hasbro is long term, rather than squeezing every cent they can. Which, granted, Secret Lairs are definitely squeezing every single cent you can out of something. That's just fact, But I think that what we've seen in the last few years, and this is something Ben touches on as well, is that financially there was a lot of unexplored territory for Magic. And I think that while Hasbro has definitely taken it in a direction vastly different than what Wizards of the Coast did before Hasbro's involvement, they are, looking at this as a long-term investment. How do we keep this game alive long-term? Rather than trying to sell the brand contrary to what other people have said in the past. I think it's here to stay. I think the interesting thing is that the game development itself is so different than any product Hasbro has ever dealt with before. Something that Ben touched on, what are the other money makers that Hasbro has? Monopoly, Nerf, Play-Doh, Transformers. Marvel,
My Little Pony,
Star Wars, yeah, My Little Pony. Like these are like institutions in like toys and pop culture, and Magic doesn't have that mainstream awareness that those do yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to see that. And I think, when you look at this earnings call and what happened year over year, not just between 2020 and 2021, but even going back to 2019 and 2018, and seeing this constant growth, at least from product viability, financially, they're doing a good job. Personally, I don't think they're doing the best job developmentally with the game.
Yeah.
But financially, at least, it's doing great.
Yeah, there's two very good points to what you just said, and the fact that Magic is now in like the top 5 or 6 IPs that Hasbro owns basically should show you that this is going to be a long living product for them. But at the same time, all the products that you mentioned, they're not effectively set in stone. But the Monopoly board is the fucking Monopoly board, man. Like, you can rename Park Place as many times as you want to fit the IP that you're plugging into it, but it's the same board. Magic changes every 3 months, every 4 months, or every month and a half if we're looking at the last 2 sets, right? But Hasbro doesn't have a product that evolves as quickly as Magic. The early to mid 90s cartoons that drove action figure sales no longer exist. They were never really part of, aside from Transformers, kind of, not really part of the Hasbro ecosystem, where people are just being forced to come up with new characters to introduce into a show to sell. That's like a Playmates and a Mattel kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily Hasbro. So they don't really know how to treat that kind of development process, the game development side of things. And it's going to be experimental for them, and eventually, hopefully, they will help WotC figure it out. Like, we just have errata on a 0-day card because they missed the key phrase until end of turn on something and made it through all the checks and balances, however long the card was in the file and locked in. It's going to receive 0-day errata. Just happened, right? Hasbro might not like that. It's not the first time it's going to happen, but it does speak to the fact that what WotC does is unique as far as Hasbro is concerned. And it's a learning process for both sides, but Hasbro is going to want to go through that process. They're going to want to support WotC in what they're doing. They might do some not housekeeping, but they might look for T-shaped growth and bring in, we have Realms Uncharted or whatever the crap is. They're going to start plugging in additional IPs to main sets, secret layers, modern only sets, what have you. But that's kind of Hasbro experimenting with the growth opportunity in Magic, not necessarily WotC looking to do that. That's Hasbro's influence, because that's what Hasbro knows how to do. They know how to buy the license for Super Mario Brothers and slap it on a Monopoly board.
Sure do.
Like
Doctor Who, Big Bang Theory, which is comedy suicide letter. And that's, seeing that is something that, and I'm definitely, someone who has said this is awful for Magic. It's at least raised its mainstream profile.
Yeah.
Getting a Walking Dead secret lair, I'm sure it brought a bunch of people in that never looked at Magic before. Mm-hmm. Dungeons and Dragons obviously did.
Yes. Yeah.
Even just based on what the art market was like for that set, you had actual real money coming in on this. And I think that, again, profile-wise, they're doing the right things for the game.
Yep. Absolutely, and the numbers show it. And I guess that's really what's important. The set of numbers that we'll never see, because WotC doesn't even know that, is how many players are actively engaged in this game. And we've mentioned it before, because you can't track kitchen table players. Whether they have DCI numbers or not, WotC doesn't know what the hell they're doing.
No.
So all WotC and Hasbro have to go on is how much money is this product making. And for the way they're treating it, it's making more than enough to continue to, house it and treat it like it is one of their best IPs, one of their best properties. And as such, that's great to see.
Yeah. And it's something that bears out.
Yeah.
It quickly became their number one IP,
Yeah.
or top 5 at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And ahead of the earnings call, the hey, we're hiring also went out, and they are doing a lot in the digital space, not just for Magic, but some of the other things under WotC as well. Some untitled projects that are looking to start digitally, and hopefully, with the growth in Arena, the profitability of Arena, Hasbro sees that as the opportunity to actually bring in and pay properly talent, so that becomes a viable opportunity to continue to play this game. And that, again, espouses an era of confidence all the way down from Hasbro to the consumer, and it allows us to believe that this game will just continue to march forward until the sands of time end.
Which I'm less confident about my 5-year Death of Magic projection, but I still think we're closer to the end of the game than the beginning. We'll see, though. That's Black Hat. That's me being the heel. So.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine that they can keep fucking mutating Birds of Paradise into something else, into infinity. But it is what it is. They're a talented group of people, and this game will live as long as they need it to.
Yeah.
Once somebody perfects Robo Moreau or whatever that thing is that auto generates cards with the most hilarious keywords you've ever read, and then they can all retire.
I just want a Robo Moreau set. I just want a set of just those cards. Is that too much to ask for? I feel like it's not.
Just cube draft it.
Cube draft that set. That sounds amazing.
Oh my god, that should be one of the VRDs.
Oh god,
only Robo Moreau cards.
We'll pitch it.
Yeah, but the earnings calls are always interesting. I think this is one of the only ones that didn't come with any kind of controversy in regards to any of the products, because previously it had read we want to just grab hold of everybody who plays Arena by the wallet and shake them.
Yeah. Which is obviously very profitable, but
that wasn't a call out in this call like it had been previously. This one just seems like it was really smooth selling. Things did well, sets sold well, everything was within our tolerance ranges. We're going to keep moving forward as is. Maybe they've finally cut the path they needed to, and they found the formula, whatever they have to. But this one just seemed to be pretty easy, and now we can see that this is an evergreen IP.
Yeah. Here's hoping.
Yep. All right, picks.
Let's do it.
All right, you went first, so I'll go first.
Go for it.
This week. So mine is yet another one of those how do you defend a staple kind of picks, and it's Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. This hasn't been on my list too long. I just realized it's been really, really flat for a really, really long time, and this is the set non-foil, nothing special about it, just straight out the pack and the regular rare slot. I'm zooming in on stocks now, and you can see it's saw a little bit of a bump at the beginning of October, up from 11 to officially 12-ish, and it's just kind of flat here. And rumor has it we're getting towards the end of distro backstock for MH2, so now's when we want to move in. Right now, Card Kingdom's buying 209 at 650. Somebody sold them 10 over the weekend. That's for non-foil. Set foil prices are actually kind of interesting. They were buying 1 at $7. Nobody's just buying the set foil. That's fine. TCG Player had 280 at $11, 6 cents market for LP. And the numbers basically held pretty strong. I think today on TCG Play there are a couple more listed, and I'll talk about that in timeline, because what's happened over the weekend is relevant to why I'm picking this now. So this has been on my list for a month, and CK has basically been buying the same amount-ish. They were buying 260 at 8, so for a little more. So they've seen a little bit of a taper off, and there were 230 on TCG Player for 12. So that's seen an increase in the quantity in the market and a decrease in market price. And then again, I'll get to that. Talk about why we're buying in now. But, as far as EDH is concerned, any deck that wants to shave on forests with the ability to search for non-basics, or any deck that wants to play a number of non-basics that also tap for green, any deck that plays green. Yeah. This is... You do it. Dummy. Come on. It's the green Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, but it has no Cabal Coffer style payoff. So this promotes the Shaving of Forest in any deck that runs green in favor of utility lands.
Eladamri.
All right, you're right. I thought that was banned.
Sure it is.
No, you mean Ruffalus?
Oh yeah, Ruffalus. Sorry. Yeah.
All right. So it promotes the Shaving of Forest in any deck that runs green in favor of utility lands, multicolor non-basics, or other basics of other types. It just frees up slots, right? It allows you to do more with less, and it allows you to extend the type of game you want to play, or just introduce more variety into your land base, because you can now do more when everything taps for green. This also sees play outside of EDH and Mono Green, Tron, Modern, and various lands decks in Legacy, and I don't expect those to be drivers. I don't really expect there to be a lot of drivers, just besides dwindling quantity. So there's not a lot to talk about this card. You check it out on Rec, and it's just like any deck that plays green. Like, yeah, this goes in the land base. The same thing with Urborg. It's like trying to defend shocks or filter lands. Like, you just play them if you have them.
Of course you're playing.
Yeah. The only defense to not playing it is you don't own it. Like, that's it. And that's a fine defense. It just makes it like difficult to talk about as a pick, because this should be a staple. Like, Soul Ring level staple. But I did also mention how I don't believe Soul Ring's a staple. Let's not go there. All right, timeline. So with MH2 products supposedly drying up a distro, buying in now should represent the absolute low point, and we have nowhere to go but up, right? That's why I would expect a bump as supply continues to dry in mid-2022, so we're looking about 9 months from now. I expect growth over time, but when marketplaces start to dry, sub 100 unique prices left, it'll be an easy out to buy a list. So we're really reliant on TCG Player here. Sales are pretty steady right now in the range of 10 to 20 copies within the reported period on TCG Player, which is about 24 to 48 hours, and I expect that to continue, though that doesn't immediately represent a reduction in the number of unique prices. Right now, there are 38 vendors with 4 or more copies that probably house about 200 total copies, ranging in price from $10 to $25. A number of these are pushing the price down, and once the individual copies that are listed competitively are purchased alongside the gatekeeping vendors, we'll begin to see growth overall. So we have a number of vendors with large quantity pushing the price down towards $10. Once they go, and once those low-hanging fruit individual vendors are pulled out of the market, then we'll see it go up. That's why I don't mind the fact that, another, 40 or so unique prices enter the marketplace on TCG Player, but with the market going down, because there's just pressure to get rid of this card. It still sells extremely well, and the limited print run of MH2 makes us fairly palatable to sit on over time, as growth should be sharper than Urborg ever was, with a floor that Urborg never reached. So Urborg was printed at least 3 times before it just kind of started to stagnate. It was in Time Spiral block Planar Chaos, I believe. That's the double rings.
EC.
Right?
Yep.
Right. That, then I think it was in an FTV lands, and then it was in M15 or something like that. It was in a core
15.
set. Yep. In well after the RTR quantity increases, right? So Urborg just tanks at that point and just continues to stabilize, and it's gone up over time as people pull copies from the market, but it continues to get printed. This is the first printing of Yavimaya that we have, so I really do expect the floor of this card to reach a floor that Urborg never had after that core set printing. I don't think we're going to see this in a standard set. Yavimaya is tied to Dominaria, so the only opportunity would be the Dominaria set that we have coming. Outside of that, I don't really think it'd be in an EDH product. It might be in a future master set or something like that. But once quantity goes, these gatekeeping vendors are pulled out of the ecosystem, and the low-hanging fruit are removed over the next couple of months as demand for this stays steady at, like I said, almost 20 plus copies a day. That's when we'll start to see this take off. But until we get there, now's the time to buy in, as it just kind of floats in around $11 to $12.
Yeah, I think, the important thing about this card, and you touched on it, is there's a direct comparison to this card in Urborg. Obviously, you don't have a Cabal Coffers, but the thing is, this is, I feel like, a cycle Wizards is going to complete. So as far as
they said no. So here's the thing.
They said a lot of things.
The reason they said no is, and this is the cheekiest thing they've ever done, is they cited Boyle and Choke. Like, that's an anarchy. Like, here's the reasons why we will never finish this cycle. And they Valakut. They just named those, right? It's not like I disagree with you, but somebody was like, so when did we get the rest?
Yeah. But point being, this is something that has a price history for an extant version, and Urborg was like a $30, $40 card before it finally stagnated at around like 20. So worst case, this card's going to hit $30 to $40 just based on EDH banned alone. Sure, Rafalos is banned in EDH, fine. Every green deck is going to run this card. Every deck that has green will run this. You're starting to see some players in lands run it in Legacy. Maybe it'll see play if Elves ever comes back in Modern. Who knows? Point is, this is such a good opportunity to get in. Like, Urborg was $5 to $10 in Standard when it first came out. $5 to $10, everyone was like, this card's fine. It interacts with Cabal coffers. That's great. And then it shot up. And same thing happened. All of a sudden, the stock dried up. Prices started exploding, and it had a bunch of eyes on it, so now it's going through the roof. I don't think there's any reason not to expect the same thing to happen to this card, especially, as you said, we are hitting like the best time for it because MH2 is drying up at all of the distros. So we've hit our peak open. There's nothing else.
And for anybody that wants to chew on Elves would play it, remember, Cradle doesn't tap for a green unless you have a fucking creature on board, right?
Yep.
How do you make a Merit Lage on turn 2? You go Dark Depths on 1, Urborg on 2, Vampire, Hexmage, because they both tap for black now. Merit Lage.
Yep.
Right? That's the secret. Cradle does nothing, and Dark Depths does nothing, unless it has a friend. And now, Yavimaya can be friends with Cradle.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
Suddenly your 2-lander is not so bad when one of your lands is Cradle.
Yeah, not even.
It's fine.
Not Yavimaya, just straight Cradle. Imagine that. Things get better when you have Cradle.
Yeah, who knew? All right, my pick is a little different, and this is something that I've tried to do for a few set releases now, and Reflections of Lityara was my last one. So I am picking Necroduality. Why? This card is EDH gold.
I'm going to bring this up on TCG so people can read it, but keep going.
Yeah. So, card is clearly designed for zombie, combo, wombo, whatever. Great. This is a card that I am targeting on release day because I have full expectation that on the race to the bottom, this card hits like $5 to $10. Great. I honestly think this is a $20 to $30 card in Standard. In Standard, before the EDH rotation happens, and all of a sudden, we've touched on this a few episodes where your EDH All-Stars and sets, you're not getting to 3 to 6 months after a release anymore. Sometimes it's, 2 to 3, and we're seeing that window shorten. This is a card I'm going to target on release day because it goes into every zombie deck. It goes great with Rothulk. It goes great with Grave Titan. It goes great with everything you want to do in zombies and black and blue. I just think it is an absolute all-star for casual EDH. Who knows? There may even be a CEDH list that uses this. Could happen. But I think that picking up this card, this is my pick for EDH absurdity from Crimson Vow. Is this card, I think, long-term, we may even see it reach 40 to 50 after the set is gone. This could be Exquisite Blood all over again.
Yeah.
And that's, pick it up release day on that race to the bottom at about 3 to 4 o'clock Central Time when we've got peak listings and we can just go for it. Card's insane.
Yep.
Timeline-wise, probably looking at about, I'd say, profitably based on what's happened with previous EDH cards like Panharmonicon, Paradox Engine, stuff like that, you're going to start to see probably by the next set release, this card start to tick up again. Smothering Tithe was the most recent example of this. That card was $15 to $20 in Standard, and that was a deal compared to where it's at now. There's no reason that this is not the Smothering Tithe of this set. It's just something that I wanted to call out and say, hey, if you want to get this, get it on release day during the race to the bottom. This card is a long-term banger.
Yep.
It's great.
Yeah. Necrodality is an interesting card because it plays off the creature type zombie again, just like Rooftop Storm did, which is another card that flew under the radar. But the other thing this card does that Rooftop Storm does is it makes cards like Conspiracy and Xenograph and Kindred Spirits, cards that, and Maskwood Nexus, I think, also does it, change all creatures to a given type within your deck. And it just allows you to essentially combo off without having to be in zombies either, or introducing something else into your zombie deck that allows you to play a bigger and better game. With Rooftop Storm, it was the Eldrazi Titans, because zombies at the time were still really weak. You didn't have a whole lot to do. You couldn't get to the board fast enough in a lot of games. So this has the opportunity to play really well outside of a dedicated zombie shell.
Yeah.
And inside it. And then also, boost up some other cards on the fringe of EDH. And so I think it's, again, important to call out, important to look for cards like this within sets and identify them, because there is always opportunity at set release to pick up on something, be it for Constructed or EDH.
Yeah.
And I think the comparison to Panharmonicon is going to hold true, except for the fact that I don't think it's going to have an EDH price tag upon release. And I think we got an announcement. Amazon's going to be flush with Crimson Vow, but there's issues getting it to the LGS. So prices might be in flux for the first couple of days or weeks as people figure out where they get their product and if they order from Amazon, when it gets to them, because I don't actually know what happens. Amazon continues to push one-day shipping with a lot of stuff right now, but they're also purporting shipping delays. Yeah. So if you pre-order boxes from Amazon now, I don't know if you get them
on release.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Or close to it. So, keep your eyes on it, definitely, and as it tanks, feel comfortable, wherever you feel comfortable buy in. Sometime in that first week is probably like your best window, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I think like you mentioned, you'll be able to churn this while it's in standard if you get in early enough.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things. So when I was looking at this pick, I had two choices. I had Necroduality or Sigarda's Summons were the two that I was going for. Both of which are EDH Gold.
Yep.
The reason I went with Necroduality is specifically the fact that it is a mythic in this set.
Yep.
So I think one of the advents of, unfortunately, the absurd collector's boosters is you actually have to spec for the rarer cards now, because I feel like this is a more reliable option than Sigarda's Summons is.
Yeah.
I think that this is better long term because of that.
Yeah. I like those picks. The one card that I identified that we never decided if we were going to do anything in regards to like another show about our ideas for what's coming out in the set, like we did for Kaldheim. Savior of Allenbach. It's another mythic from the set, but I'm looking at this from a constructed standpoint. It costs 1 double white for a 1/2, and you're like, whatever, that's really shitty. It's got the new keyword on it, training. Whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Whenever Savior of Allenbach trains, exile up to one other target creature card from the battlefield or creature card from a graveyard. When it leaves the battlefield, put the exiled cards onto the battlefield under their owner's control. Like, a lot of things are keeping the humans deck down in Modern, but the ability to continue to train up this card, make it bigger, and continue to exile somebody else's board gives the humans deck a bit more play, and this would be my target for Constructed.
Yeah, that was the one that I was looking at for Constructed as well, because I think it has the power level that it could even be playable in Death and Taxes and Legacy.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Yep, I think there's definitely some stuff here for people to chew on it for Crimson thus far within Crimson Vow, absolutely. But yeah, other than that, I think that's all I got for this week.
I'm good.
So we are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Patreon, and YouTube. Yep. The podcast is on Audible, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts. Finally, that was difficult to get through when we switch hosts.
Yeah.
I am at Halt I Am Reptar on Twitter. If you want to talk, you are
At Thirsty
See you
Sizzler.
next week.